The elderly woman stood at the counter, her hands trembling as she held out a small, crumpled check. She had been waiting in line for nearly an hour, only to be met with cold stares and impatient sighs from the bank staff. "Ma'am, you need to leave. You're holding up the line," the teller said harshly, rolling his eyes. The customers behind her chuckled, some whispering rude comments under their breath. Her face burned with shame. She had worked hard her entire life. She had paid her taxes, raised a family, and now, in her final years, she just wanted to withdraw a small amount of money to pay for her medicine. But today, she felt invisible, like she didn't matter at all. But then, the bank doors opened and in walked Keanu Reeves. The moment his eyes landed on the scene in front of him, he knew exactly what was happening. And what he did next left everyone in the bank completely frozen. "Hey there, before we dive back into the story, let us know where you're watching from. If you love stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We've got another amazing story coming your way tomorrow." The air inside the bank was cold, but the humiliation burning inside the elderly woman's chest was even colder. "I just need to withdraw some money," she repeated softly, her voice shaking. The young teller sighed dramatically and shook his head. "I already told you, ma'am. This check is too old. We can't process it. Come back another time." She swallowed hard, gripping her cane for support. "Please, it's important." Before she could say another word, a man behind her groaned. "Oh, come on. Just move already." More murmurs of frustration spread through the bank. No one cared that she was struggling. No one cared that she was someone's mother, someone's grandmother, and that's when Keanu Reeves stepped forward. The moment he entered, the energy in the bank shifted. People turned their heads, whispers of, "Is that Keanu Reeves?" rippling through the crowd. But Keanu wasn't focused on them. His eyes were locked on her. The woman looked up, startled as he gently touched her shoulder. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I help you?" Her lips trembled. I just need to cash this check." "But they say it's too old." Keanu turned to the teller, his jaw tightening. "What seems to be the issue?" The young man behind the counter shifted nervously. Well, sir, this check is from a few months ago, and..." Keanu raised a brow. "So? That shouldn't be a problem." The teller hesitated, his confidence faltering. "Well, technically, we could process it, but what?" Keanu's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. The bank manager, a middle-aged man in a stiff suit, walked over, noticing the commotion. "Is there a problem here?" Keanu crossed his arms. "Yes, there is. It seems your staff is refusing to assist this woman with a simple transaction. Is this how you treat your elderly customers?" The manager's face turned red. "And no, of course not. It's just policies and procedures, you understand, policies and procedures?" Keanu repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. "She's standing here, shaking, asking for help, and you're hiding behind policies?" The entire bank had gone silent. No one dared to speak. The manager cleared his throat. I apologize, Mr. Reeves. We'll take care of it right away." Keanu turned back to the elderly woman and gave her a reassuring smile. "Ma'am, may I see your check?" With trembling hands, she handed it over. Keanu glanced at it, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his own checkbook. The staff gasped. The customers stared. The teller's face turned ghostly pale. Without hesitation, Keanu Reeves wrote her a brand new check that he gently placed it in her hands and said, "You don't have to worry about this anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes. But, sir, this is too much. I can't accept this." Keanu smiled warmly. "You can. And you will." She covered her mouth, overwhelmed with emotion. No one had ever treated her with such kindness before. The entire bank watched in stunned silence. Even the customers who had mocked her earlier now felt ashamed. Keanu turned to the staff and said firmly, "Let this be a reminder. You never know who's watching. And more importantly, you never know what someone is going through." The bank manager nodded quickly. "Understood, sir." Keanu looked back at the elderly woman, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Take care of yourself, okay?" With that, he walked toward the exit. But before he left, he turned back and gave the staff one last look, one that sent a clear message: treat people with kindness. Always. And then, just like that, he was gone. The elderly woman stood frozen for a moment, staring down at the check in her hands. And for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. She wiped her tears, stood up a little straighter, and walked out of the bank with her head held high. And the entire staff? They never treated another customer the same way again. The elderly woman clutched the check in her trembling hands, staring at it in disbelief. The numbers written on it seemed unreal. More than enough for what she needed, more than she had dared to hope for. Her lip quivered as she tried to find the words. Mr. Reeves. I don't know how to thank you." Keanu smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me, ma'am. Just promise me one thing: take care of yourself." Tears welled in her tired eyes. "I will. I promise." The entire bank remained silent. No one moved. The same people who had chuckled and whispered rude comments just moments ago now looked at the floor, their faces filled with shame. The teller, who had been so dismissive, swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he straightened his tie. The bank manager stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Reeves, I assure you, this was all a misunderstanding. Our bank prides itself on customer service." Keanu turned his head slowly, his piercing gaze locking onto the manager. "Customer service?" His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable sharpness to it. "If this is what you call customer service, then maybe you should rethink how you run this place." The manager's face turned red. "We'll make sure this never happens again, sir." Keanu didn't respond right away. Instead, he let the silence linger, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Then, he turned back to the elderly woman. "Do you have someone who can take you home?" She nodded softly. "My grandson is waiting outside. He drives me wherever I need to go." Keanu smiled. "That's good. Family is everything." She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her worn-out cardigan. "Bless you, young man. Bless you." Keanu gave her a small nod, then turned and walked toward the exit. But just as he reached the door, something unexpected happened. One by one, customers started clapping. It started as a slow, hesitant clap from a woman near the back of the line. Then, another person joined in. And another. Within seconds, the entire bank was applauding. Keanu, never one for attention, simply gave a polite nod before stepping outside into the sunlight. The moment he was gone, the atmosphere in the bank shifted. The staff stood stiffly behind the counters, their faces pale. The young teller, who had humiliated the woman, exhaled shakily. I didn't know," he muttered under his breath. The manager shot him a sharp look. "Neither did I. And now the whole world will know." He glanced nervously at the customers, some of whom were already pulling out their phones, no doubt ready to share what had just happened. Meanwhile, outside the bank, Keanu spotted a young man standing by an old, slightly rusted car. The elderly woman slowly approached him, gripping the check in her hand like it was a priceless treasure. "Grandma? What's wrong?" the young man asked, his brows furrowing in concern. She let out a soft, breathless laugh. "You won't believe what just happened to me." Keanu gave the young man a warm nod before stepping toward his own car. As he opened the door, he felt a presence beside him. It was the elderly woman. She looked up at him, her eyes still filled with gratitude. "The world needs more people like you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu chuckled softly. "No, ma'am. The world just needs more kindness." With that, he got into his car and drove away, leaving behind not just a woman who had been helped, but a room full of people who had just witnessed what true kindness looks like, and that was something none of them would ever forget. As Keanu Reeves drove away, the elderly woman stood watching until his car disappeared down the street. She clutched the check in her hands, still overwhelmed by what had just happened. Her grandson looked at her with concern. "Grandma, are you okay? What happened in there?" She took a shaky breath, wiping the last of her tears. "It's a long story, dear, but that man, that wonderful man, just reminded me that there are still good people in the world." The young man frowned, confused. "Wait, that was Keanu Reeves, wasn't it?" She chuckled softly, nodding. "Yes. And he saved me today in more ways than one." Her grandson stared at her, then at the check in her hand. "He gave you that?" She nodded again, her eyes glistening. "Not just money. He gave me my dignity back." The young man clenched his jaw, a mix of anger and relief in his expression. "I can't believe they treated you that way. I should go in there and..." She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "No, my love. That's not necessary. The lesson has already been taught. And I think they'll remember it for a long time." He sighed, looking down at the check, then back at his grandmother. "Are you sure you're okay?" She smiled. "I am now. Let's go home." They got into the car, and as her grandson started the engine, she stared out the window, lost in thought. She thought of her late husband. Of the years they had struggled, working hard to raise their children. She thought of how the world had changed, how sometimes it felt like older people were forgotten, left behind, treated as if they didn't matter anymore. But today, one man reminded her that she did matter. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Meanwhile, back at the bank, the tension in the air was thick. The manager stood stiffly, looking at his employees. "Well? What are you all standing around for? Get back to work." The teller, the one who had humiliated the woman, swallowed hard and nodded. "Why yes, sir." But as he reached for the next customer's paperwork, his hands were shaking. He couldn't get Keanu Reeves' words out of his head. "Let this be a reminder. You never know who's watching. And more importantly, you never know what someone is going through." He had laughed at that woman. He had treated her like an inconvenience. And now? The entire internet was probably watching. One of the other tellers whispered, "Do you think someone recorded that?" The manager's jaw clenched. Of course they did. And if this goes viral, we're in trouble. He glanced around nervously, seeing customers still murmuring, some typing on their phones. They had all seen it. They had all witnessed the way they treated an elderly woman. The manager straightened his tie, forcing a smile as he called out, "Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstandings today. We at this bank value all our customers, and we will be reviewing our policies to ensure better service in the future." No one clapped. No one cheered. The damage was already done. The manager turned back to his employees, lowering his voice. "From now on, I don't care how long a customer takes. You will treat them with respect. Do I make myself clear?" They all nodded silently because none of them wanted to be the next viral video. That night, the story spread like wildfire. Videos of Keanu Reeves stepping in to help the elderly woman flooded social media. News headlines read, "Police car light Keanu Reeves defends elderly woman after bank humiliates her." Police car light fire, Keanu Reeves proves once again why he's the kindest man in Hollywood. Fire red heart, Keanu Reeves saves the day, again. His actions at a local bank leave the internet in tears. Red Heart. Millions of people watched. Millions shared their own stories of elderly loved ones being mistreated. People commented things like, "Speech balloon, my grandma went through something similar. Thank you, Keanu, for standing up for her. Speech balloon, this made me cry. The world needs more people like Keanu." Speech balloon, imagine treating an old lady like that, only for Keanu Reeves to put you in your place. I'd quit my job on the spot. And just like that, the world knew what had happened. A few days later, Keanu Reeves received a handwritten letter. It was from the elderly woman. He sat in his quiet home, unfolding the delicate paper with care. Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. "Dear Mr. Reeves, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I just wanted to say thank you, not just for your generosity, but for treating me like a human being when no one else did. That day at the bank, I felt small. I felt like I didn't matter. But then you walked in and reminded me that I do. My grandson was so proud. He told all his friends that the great Keanu Reeves helped his grandmother, but to me, you were just a kind stranger who saw my pain and decided to do something about it. Thank you for that. I hope the world gives you back all the kindness you have given to others. With gratitude, Margaret." Keanu smiled as he read the last lines, his heart full. He folded the letter neatly, placed it inside a drawer, and took a deep breath. This was why he did what he did, because kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything, and sometimes, even the smallest act of compassion can restore someone's faith in humanity.